All right, folks, we got a critical update for you guys as DC is in full panic over the Basel III endgame. We get the CPI report that just dropped earlier this morning and inflation coming down for the first time since 2020. And despite this, the great inflation report, it's cooling, right? Inflation's cooling. Let me know in the comments down below how you feel about inflation cooling right now. But despite this great inflation report for the Biden White House, the Biden campaign is in full panic as we have their very own Democrats are coming out, celebrities coming out, and saying that it's time for Biden to step aside. Without further ado, folks, I want to get right on into this. Here's what's happening with the markets. Oh, before, real quick, ZachRector.com has all of my community resources available for you guys. Appreciate you. The inflation report comes out. First time inflation has come back down month over month in basically 4 years, since 2020. So this is a good inflation report, right? Inflation's coming back down, and now everybody, they already were anticipating a Fed rate cut in September, and now with this inflation report coming back down, this is giving the Fed the ammunition they need to cut rates, right? Well, what's this doing to markets? Well, the DXY, which is the dollar index, has fallen off. This is because the dollar is not going to be strengthened anymore. We're not going to be raising rates anymore. We're going to be lowering rates. So we got a weaker dollar. DXY comes back down below 105, down into the 104 range. What this does, let's start with crypto, is it makes crypto pop back up today. So Bitcoin was back above 58. I think it actually stretched up over 59,000 earlier today, responding very well. This also made gold and silver pump today. Gold back above 2,400 and silver back above 3,150. For the stock market, now we're starting to see it crack. Now we're starting to see the signs of weakness. So the stock market was down, cryptocurrency up, gold, silver up, and the DXY falling off. Let's get into it. So I'm going to show you here charts just real quick. Like I said, here's your Dow Jones hanging out here down just a little bit today. Your NASDAQ 100 down quite a bit more. And the S&P 500 was also down today. This is your 4-hour chart, by the way. Now, as I said, the DXY fallen back off. Last week, it had gone up above 105 once again. But here today, the DXY falls off here, going basically all the way down to 104. Okay, so that's the dollar index falling off. What does this do to gold and silver? Gives us some nice green candles, up to 2,400 for gold. What a beautiful thing to see. Just an absolute beautiful sight. I don't know what gets me more excited, that gold or that silver chart, right? Because silver's still cooking. Still has a ways to go, starting to wake up. 31.50 for silver earlier today, basically all the way up to 31.75, almost to 32 bucks. Okay, and now it's cooled off here a little bit, but 31.50 for silver. Love to see it. Let's go check our crypto real quick. Bitcoin, like I said, popped all the way up to 59.5 earlier today, just within the last few hours, up to 59.5 after the CPI comes out, but now it's cooling off. And it's cooling off now with the rest of the stock market. We'll continue to watch it. Now, as I stated here, great CPI report as far as the trend on inflation finally starting to come down. Now, we call it the CPI lie. We know what they've been stripping out. But even when we just take a look here at the government manipulated data, this is the first decline in prices since May of 2020. CPI and core CPI monthly changes. And you got to see that they actually round up and they round down. So the consumer price index, less food and energy, that's your core. That was up by 0.065. They round up to basically 0.1% month over month change. They just round up. So we increased by 0.1, very small increase. But on the regular CPI, we come down 0.05. But they round down and say that we've come down 0.1, right? So despite this, I'm going to show you, year over year, our inflation still running at 3% for CPI and for core. The month over month change was, for the first time in 4 years, was down, right? Inflation's coming down for the first time in 4 years. But when you still look at the year over year, we're still above 3%. So despite them trying to say that inflation's coming back down, inflation's cooling, this is great, Fed can cut rates. Well, the year over year is still over 3%. Take a look at it. So initial jobless claims came out today, and they actually were below the expectations in the forecast. So that's also, a good sign for not having as many jobs lost. But once again, this is just the initial. They'll make a revision on that. We'll see where the revision actually lands us. CPI, down 0.1%. Like I said, they round. Now, CPI year over year, though, still at 3%. The expectation was 3.1. We beat it. That's great. But we're still way above the 2% target. When you look at core is still increased by 0.1%. Core year over year is still at 3.3%, beating expectations of 3.4, but inflation is still hot. Inflation is still hot, absolutely. Now, the expectation for the monthly U.S. federal budget was negative $33 billion of a deficit, and we're actually at $66 billion, so twice as bad on the monthly U.S. federal budget. But this is the front page of Market Watch right here. Latest inflation report helps Biden, but all eyes are on his press conference tonight. He's going to be delivering a press conference at 6:30 Eastern, that's 3:30 Pacific, and this is all about his campaign, right? He's trying to come out and say that the debate was strong. Don't worry, we're going to stay in this thing. And, basically celebrities are coming out. George Clooney came out and said it's time to step aside. His own senators on his side of the aisle coming out and saying it's time to step aside. So despite this inflation report coming out and being good, Biden can start to tout that we're cooling inflation. Inflation's coming down under my watch, right? This is what Biden's campaign should be running with. But many now suggesting that Biden's campaign should be coming to an end. And it appears that it is, because the fact that they've come out here and vetoed the SAB 121 repeal, right? I talked about this last night, and they postponed the vote yesterday in dramatic fashion by hand delivering a letter. One of his staff members hand delivers a letter that apparently was written by Biden, right? If you believe that, right? If you believe that Biden wrote that letter, then Digital Asset Investor has an igloo in South Georgia for you. I mean, come on. And so Biden delivers a letter, dramatic fashion yesterday. It postpones the vote. Then they come back today. And what do? The House vote to override Biden's veto of the repeal of SAB 121 has failed to reach the 2/3 majority. The veto remains sustained. #fire Gary Gensler. And so we have failed to get that 2/3 majority is what it takes to override the veto. We have failed. And Biden and the campaign and the team at the White House doing their part by delivering that letter. Did that push some of the Democrats over the board to decide to not go along with the other side of the aisle? And many other Democrats who actually were in favor of this repeal. This was a bipartisan effort to issue this SAB 121 repeal because this is Congress taking their power back. They shouldn't be having to do this, but this is the SEC trying to issue laws, trying to issue rules by issuing a bulletin. Just putting out a little bulletin post and saying, yeah, this is now the law. No, that's not how this works. If you want to propose rulemaking at the SEC, you're supposed to do so in the formal fashion that allows time for comment, allows time for people to contribute to the conversation, debate, and then the Congress is supposed to pass laws. Of course, not under Gary Gensler's watch, and with the Biden White House, they came in, even though Congress came together and passed this repeal, Biden vetoed it, gets sent back. We didn't get 2/3 majority, not enough, too many sellouts in DC. That's just what this comes down to. Too many sellouts in DC. And all of the stuff that they should get together and agree on, they don't, right? And when it comes to selling out our country, well, that's when both sides of the aisle come together and get something done. It's absolutely terrible. And I'm going to speak on both sides of the aisle getting scared about the Basel III endgame and being in full panic about the Basel III endgame. One more data point, then we'll get there. The SEC officially ending the investigation into stablecoin issuer Paxos, declaring that Binance USD is not a security. So this was an investigation that was already underway with Paxos, and this is the Treasury that issues Binance's stablecoin. Massive amount of manipulation with that coin, by the way. And nonetheless, they've come out now, ended this investigation. They're saying that Binance USD is not a security, at least in this current offering. In and of itself is not a security. Does that mean that it can't be offered as an investment contract security? Right? We understand the token itself, not a security, but it can be tied up in an investment contract. But nonetheless, this is great. Another loss for the SEC, another one. And this is what this is why I wanted to report on this. It's another loss for the SEC. Their jurisdiction, being met at the perimeter, a line in the sand being drawn by another judge, well, not in this case a judge, but the own SEC investigation coming to an end because they know that they can't push it any further. Another loss for the SEC. Now, as I titled this episode, DC Panic Over the Basel III Endgame. This was my key takeaway from Powell's testimony in the Senate and the House this week. Great inflation report, inflation's coming down. This is all fine and dandy. And most of it was just political pandering back and forth and political posturing from both sides of the aisle as Powell gave his testimony. But my key takeaway from this, and most people miss this, is the panic in their voices from both sides of the aisle coming to an agreement and saying, whoa, we better slow down on this Basel III endgame. Why? It's because their bankster buddies that fund their campaigns are telling them, hey, you guys need to get this point across to Jerome Powell that we need to reconsider some of the capital requirements and liquidity requirements for the Basel III endgame proposal, because if we don't get this through, we get tightened way up. This really is going to put the banks in check once again. And so I asked XAI to summarize the Basel III endgame for us real quick. I'm going to read this off. Let me make sure you guys can see this. Yeah. So this is on X right here. I asked for the summary of Basel III. Basel III is an international regulatory framework for banks developed by the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision in response to the financial crisis of 07-09. It aims to strengthen the regulation, supervision, and risk management of banks. The Basel III reforms have now been integrated into the consolidated Basel framework, which comprises all of the current and forthcoming standards of the Basel Committee. The measures under Basel III include, this is where it gets important, guys, enhancing capital requirements, making the banks have more capital before they give out all these loans. Enhancing capital requirements, introducing new liquidity standards, and improving risk management practices. These changes are intended to make the banking system more resilient to financial shocks and reduce the likelihood of future crises. Why would both sides of the aisle come together and be in full panic over the Basel III endgame? What's the problem? Like I said, their bankster buddies are giving them the call and saying you need to stress to Fed Chair Powell that we're not ready to roll over to this Basel III endgame just quite yet. And what does that mean? It means that the banks are still weak. It means that the banks are still going to break. It means that we need to get utility with no counterparty risk outside of this system and outside of counterparty risk that's going to be exploding and imploding right before us. And now the systemically important banks, we know they'll get bailed out, but your small regional banks, we are going to see more failures. And we're not going to see all of them get saved. And so we're seeing it in China take place right now as far as banks still collapsing over there. We reported on how they banned short selling in some of their markets over there as well. So the panic's already taken place over in China. This is why China and Hong Kong have been absolutely eating up all of the gold and silver because they want utility with no counterparty risk. I want utility with no counterparty risk, and that includes our XRP as well on the digital front. When it comes to precious metals, you guys know that I got you covered at ZachRector.com. Let us know, roll over a 401k retirement account or deliver it direct to your doorstep. Let us know how we can help you. But utility with no counterparty risk is how we prepare ourselves for the rollout of Basel III, for the banking crisis that's going to continue, for the inflation that's still running hot, despite the number dropping month over month. This is the first time in 4 years that month over month CPI has dropped. Everybody's going to celebrate. Everybody's going to celebrate and front run the Fed rate cuts. But the markets are starting to front run the Fed rate cuts by dropping off. As we warned about, look back historically, by the time the Fed's cutting rates, the situation's already bad and the stock market actually breaks after the rate cuts. So make sure you guys stay tapped in with us. We're going to continue to provide updates on these financial markets, the current events, tying it all together, making sure that you're going to be able to take advantage of the greatest transfer of wealth in world history. So if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you appreciate our updates, if you could smash that thumbs up for me on the way out, I greatly appreciate that. Everything can be found at ZachRector.com, and may you guys have a blessed day. We'll see you in the next one. I am your host, Zach Rector. I really appreciate all of the love and support. If you want to support the channel, just remember that you can start by smashing that thumbs up for me, sharing this content far and wide, and everything else is at my website.